Hello, everybody. My name is Lewis Cobble, apiary inspector with North Carolina Department of Agriculture, and I would like to share with you this presentation entitled "The Importance of a Robust Varroa Monitoring and Management Plan." And I'm going to share with you kind of my plan from 2019, the results of that plan, and also share some of the interesting stuff that I learned implementing that plan. So let's see what we have. High mite load equals a high virus load equals dead bees, almost always. And especially when we're talking about getting bees through the winter, most of the overwintering problems that I see are related to just this high virus load because of high mites. And we don't have those healthy winter bees that get from fall, say from October all the way to February. And so if you're having trouble getting your bees through the winter, a good Varroa monitoring and management plan is a great place to start, definitely. We're going to talk more about, or less about how to monitor and more about the importance of monitoring. And so if you don't have your monitoring skills together yet, I would certainly recommend this keepbeesalive.org. This is the Michigan Pollinator Initiative, and they have just a website full of really good Varroa information from the biology of the mites and the bees to how to monitor. And so definitely take advantage of that. It's just a great clearinghouse of up-to-date and peer-reviewed information. Very good resource. So keepbeesalive.org. Use that as your kind of clearinghouse of good information. Bailey Bee Supply is a bee supply in Hillsborough, North Carolina. I used to live in that area, and Randall Austin does an article for them each month. Randall is one of my bee buddies or mentors, and one of my favorite folks. And he has a good article in the March, his March article at Bailey Bee Supply entitled "Management Begins with Monitoring." And he takes a look at the different ways that people monitor. And I think it's a very good article. I hope you'll check that out. This is, of course, from the Honeybee Health Coalition Tools for Varroa Management document. This is our kind of acceptable thresholds, mite infestation thresholds. So we're going to be talking about mostly population increase through population decrease. So through the 2019 season from February to November. And please note, in this column we have acceptable level, and in this column we have control promptly. You're in the danger zone. And please note the acceptable level at this time of year. So today is March 15th or 16th. And so we're in this population increase phase. The safe zone is less than 1%, so less than 1 mite per 100 bees, right? And notice that the danger level is more than 2 or 3 mites per 100 bees. And so please take that to heart, that there is just not any wiggle room in between things are probably okay and things are probably out of control. So it's really important to make sure you stay on top of your mite loads. And I'm going to just keep talking about that all through this presentation today. So we're going to talk about, we're going to look at my program. Last year, I have usually about 30 colonies in the yard, and I monitored every queen mite colony 6 times during the season last year. So I started in late February Came back again in late April, early June, mid-July, mid-September, mid to late October. And so we're going to look, and also had 3 problem children that I monitored around Thanksgiving. So we're going to talk about and look at all these monitorings. These are my results from the February monitoring. I've ranked the results from high to low. The red bracket, that means that I took some action. So these were above my threshold, so I applied a miticide. And so whenever you see a red bracket on these statistics, that indicates that I did something. And these are the statistics for that February monitoring. I monitored 21 colonies. So there were a few more colonies in the apiary. Some were still a little too small to monitor. So I had to kind of get those beefed up, and may have had some queenless colonies as well. I monitored 21 colonies. The mean, that just means the average. So if I add up all these numbers and divide by 21, it's the average infestation rate, 0.83%. The median, 0.33, that's the number that's in the middle. So these are ranked from high to low. And with 21 samples, I have 10 above and 10 below, and 0.33 is that number that's in the middle. So that's fun to watch. The mode just means the number that happens most often. I always like to have the mode be 0, right? And of course the minimum and the maximum. So the minimum 0, the maximum is 4.88, almost 5. And then I indicate what my threshold was at this monitoring. So anything above this threshold got treated. And so I set my threshold at 0.8 at this early monitoring. And so these colonies did get a treatment, and what they got was Apivar. It was early enough in the season that I could apply the Apivar and also get it out of the colonies 2 weeks before I needed to put my honey supers on. So that is a label requirement that if you're using Apivar in the spring, those strips need to be out of the colony 2 weeks before your honey supers go on. So you have to be very careful if you're using this particular treatment in the spring. There are other options for treatments, but I use Apivar. Now, the interesting thing I thought from February was, especially these 3 or 4 highest infestation rates up here, especially this colony that's at 5% in February. Now, many beekeepers, if they have a monitoring program, it doesn't start until usually August. And now, so think about what might have happened if I had not managed to monitor all of my colonies in February, and I didn't get around to monitoring them until August. So what do you think that this colony that was at 5% in February would have looked like in August? If it were still alive, I imagine that it would have impacted other bees in my apiary, other colonies in my apiary, and probably other colonies in my neighborhood, other apiaries in my neighborhood, my neighbors' stuff. And if I had not monitored at all, I could have done some real damage. So I guess my point here is start your monitoring program early. The other point here is I think it's critical that you monitor every colony. If you're just kind of spot checking your apiary, the chances that you actually caught some of these higher infestations in your apiary would be slim if you were only monitoring, say, 20% of your apiaries. And it's these are the ones that you really have to catch. In order to catch them, I think you have to monitor every colony, right? So came back in about 8 weeks later. So this part of this was kind of doing some post-treatment monitoring on those 6 colonies that got treated in February. But the other part of this is I want to make sure things are in good order before I put honey supers on. So this is my monitoring just before my honey supers went on, and things were in pretty good shape. I had one colony that was almost 1.6%, but I fudged my threshold a little bit, set that at 2, and I didn't take any action in April. So I don't keep track of colonies from one monitoring to the next, so I can't tell you right now um, uh, how those colonies that were treated with Apivar, what the post-treatment was, but I can tell you that it did control the mites. So I did go back and look at those. So my post-treatment monitoring of those colonies showed that the Apivar did work for me there. Came back in June, so that those spring honey supers have just come off of my colonies, and so I want to make sure that I'm still in control. I looked at 27 colonies. The average is 0.85% infestation. The median is 0.67. The mode is 0.33. The minimum is 0. The max is 5. And I set my threshold at 1.6 to catch this and anything above that. And in June, I used Mighty Quick Strips. I happen to have some on hand, and so I used that. So I did treat 3 colonies, and I did lose 1 queen during the treatment. So not ideal, but I have plenty of spare parts in the yard, and for me, it doesn't bother me that I lose a queen every now and then during a treatment. It's more important to me that I handle the mites. So if you only have 1 or 2 colonies, that can be it's a different story. If you don't have spare parts in the yard, you have to be more careful with your treatments. All right, so I put honey supers back on, except for these 3. They kind of came out of production because I wanted to handle those mites first before I put any honey supers on. But the rest of them, they're back into production. They're ready to go. Got supers on for that summer honey. All right, July 21st, that summer, those supers of summer honey have come off and have been extracted. And now I am in winter prep mode. So I am making sure that I have good, strong, healthy colonies, low mite loads going to the winter. That's my number 1 job from now until November. So that process starts today. Went through, monitored every queen mite colony. That was 33 colonies, and you can see that the numbers have steadily climbed through this very productive summer. The average is 1 2/3. The median is 2. The mode is 1 and 0.67 and 0. The minimum is 0, and the max is 8%. So that's much higher than I would like to see at any time. My threshold for treatment in late July and early August is 0%. I know what happens to mite levels in August and September. They go through the roof, and I don't have any tolerance for that. And so my plan is to get ahead of them. And so even these colonies that were at 0% at this monitoring, they got a dose of Apivar as well. Everybody got treated here. Notice if your median is 2%, that means half of the stuff in your apiary is above 2%. And my threshold is, I would like to be at really 1% or less all the time, but at peak population here, we can let stuff go to 2 or 3%. But even if we set the threshold at 3%, 40% of the apiary is out of control. If we set the threshold at 2%, 50% of apiary is out of control in late July. Important to get something done there. Came back about 8 weeks later, mid-September, and this is my post-treatment monitoring after that Apivar treatment in late July, and things look really good. I monitored 31 queen right colonies. The mean or the average is 0.01% infestation. The median is 0. The mode is 0. The minimum is 0. I did have a colony at 2%. No, not so bad. My threshold is 3%. I didn't take any action. Didn't do anything. I thought things looked really good. I was very pleased with the efficacy of this product for me at this point. That doesn't mean that it works for everybody, and that's something that I really want to stress. I've seen all of the miticides work, and I've also seen all of the miticides fail. And so I think it really is important to do that post-treatment monitoring to make sure that things are in order. It's also important to do the pre-treatment monitoring to see what you have ahead of time. So I can't stress enough the importance of monitoring. So in mid-September, and I have almost no mites in my apiary, most of my colonies had 0 mites in the sample. You would think that you could just feed them up, make sure they got plenty of food and plenty of bees, and that would be the end of the story. See you in February. But that's not the case, and that's one of the most interesting things that I discovered with all this monitoring in my apiary in 2019. So let's go back in October. So just a month later, just 4 weeks, and look what we have here. I have a colony at 5%, a colony at 6%, a colony above 6%. And I did track these colonies from September to October, and I can say with confidence that these 3 colonies had 0 mites in the sample just 1 month ago. And now they're wildly over the threshold of 3%. And that kind of caught me off guard. So my goodness, where did these mites come from? These colonies were just squeaky clean just a month ago. And so my first thought was, maybe the Apivar didn't catch mites that were under the cap brood. I don't know. So I decided to go back with another dose of Apivar just to kind of do an experiment. So if I apply Apivar again and come back and I still have the mites, that tells me that the Apivar was not effective. If I come back and the mites have been handled by the Apivar, that tells me that those mites probably came from somewhere else. So we hear about mite bombs, either colonies that are falling apart, neighbors' colonies falling apart, or feral colonies falling apart, and my bees are out finding those colonies, robbing them, and picking up mites in the process, or those bees and mites were dispersing from those failing colonies to my colony. So I think that the mite bomb theory is real, and I think I saw it in my own apiary in 2019. So I think it's most beekeepers. I'm going to go back one slide. Most beekeepers would say, "Oh, I had a great, effective treatment. My bees are looking great in September. I don't need to worry about this anymore." And my point here is, you're not done yet. I would wait until you really are putting those bees to winter, putting the bees to bed for winter before you sleep well regarding mites. So this was probably, I think, the most interesting part of what my monitoring plan showed me in 2019. This is just a little graph of those 3 problem children colonies. So they had kind of average mite loads in my pre-treatment monitoring in July. I applied the Apivar treatment here late July, came back in September. All 3 colonies are squeaky clean. Came back 1 month later, and they're all above the threshold. I applied another treatment of Apivar and brought them back into control. But I think this is a good example I hear people say, oh, I'm a new beekeeper. I don't need to worry about mites this year. I'm just getting started, no problem. Or, I have a Varroa resistant queen. I have a VSH queen or a Russian queen, something that is that's better at dealing with mites than others. I don't need to worry about it. And I think this is good evidence that that's not a good bet at all. So let's say this blue column here is your brand new beekeeper, doesn't have to worry about mites, or your beekeeper with a Varroa resistant stock in July. This is just an average beekeeper or average queen. This is a poor queen. And we bring them all to a level playing field in September and then look at them in October. So these good genetics might be good at keeping mites low in their own colony or mite production low in their own colony, but they don't protect you from reinfestation from outside. So please keep that in mind. I think genetics are good genetics, certainly something that we should all strive for, but it's not the silver bullet. So keep that in mind. This is the average infestation in my apiary at each of my monitoring periods. So the red line here is kind of my target threshold that I don't want to go above. I've set it at 1% in February and April, and at 3% in June, July, September, and October. And I was successful at the apiary level of keeping things below my threshold. So that's very good. Until we look at the max infestation. So same deal, set my threshold at 1% for February and April, and 3% June, July, September, October. And at almost every monitoring period, I have outliers that are above, sometimes wildly above my threshold. And so I think that's important to understand that if you're not monitoring every colony, it's very easy to miss these outliers. And these outliers are going to impact other colonies in your apiary. So it's critical that you get up there and do that work and find those outliers. I think of it as kind of playing a game of whack-a-mole, and the monitoring is what tells you where to whack. And you've got to do that monitoring to know where to whack, right? So this is kind of a rehash of kind of my plan. Monitored in February, 6 colonies got Apivar. In April, everything was looking good, didn't need to do anything. June 4th, 3 colonies got Formic. July 21st, every colony in the apiary got Apivar. In September 17th, everything looked good, didn't have to take any action. October 21, I had 3 colonies above my threshold. They got another dose of Apivar. And then in December, all colonies got an oxalic acid vaporization. So they were kind of at their lowest amount of capped brood, which is a great opportunity to use oxalic acid to clean up anything that I might have missed in October. We did kind of see not just those 3 outliers in October, but in the apiary, there were other things that were kind of creeping up. And so I think this December oxalic acid vaporization did a good job of cleaning things up that I missed with other stuff. And I do have my February 14, 2020 monitoring. So this is my first monitoring of 2020, and it does indicate that oxalic acid vaporization was probably a good idea. So all the zeros here are the colonies that are in my yard at my house that got vaporized in December. This one colony here, it had 1 mite in 300 bees. It's at another place somewhere, not at my house, and it did not get vaporized, and it's the only colony that showed any mites. It's still not out of control. I didn't do anything to it in February, let it ride, but I was very pleased with my February numbers, and I do give oxalic acid credit for that. Things to remember when we're talking about these treatments. 1/3 of the time they work as planned. So you have a high mite load, you apply a treatment, and then you have a low mite load. So that's what we would like to happen every time, but turns out that's not what happens every time. 1/3 of the time they work. So you have a high mite load, you apply a treatment, then you have a low mite load, and then just 2 to 4 weeks later you have a high mite load again. You're back above the threshold. And I saw that in my apiary. 1/3 of the time, the treatment just fails. So you have a high mite load, you apply a treatment, and then after the treatment, you have a high or even higher mite load than when you started. And while I did not see that in my apiary this year, I did see it in other people's apiaries. Definitely saw that in other people's apiaries. And that's something that I think, this is something that I think many beekeepers need to understand. I think many of us feel like, oh, I took some action, I treated my bees, I handled the mites. And that's just not the case. You really have to do the monitoring to see, if you got the job done or not, and if it held. This is an example of that. This is an apiary, a club apiary. And so they had several colonies in their apiary. We're just going to look at one colony through the season. They started their monitoring program in April on a nuke that they got. No mites in April. No mites in May. That's good. 1 mite in the sample in June. Still not bad. We're in control. In July, 1 mite in their 300 bee sample, looking good. In August, we were up to 2%. So they had 6 mites in their 300 bee sample. Yeah, that's right. And they decided to play it conservative, and they went ahead and treated the whole apiary, including this colony, with APA like VAR. This is the one of the thymol-based treatments. So one of the essential oils. They came back post-treatment and monitored, and 9% infestation in September. That's not what we want to see, but at least they monitored and caught it. So they decided that they would try some oxalic vaporization. And it's not something that I recommend at this time of the year because we have a lot of cat brood. And so they thought they would get over that hump by doing multiple applications. So they said, we're going to do 3 applications 7 days apart, right? So I just call that 3 by 7. So we'll do an application today, we'll do another one next week, and we'll do another one the week after that. So we'll try to catch that stuff that's coming out of the cat brood. And so how do you think that turned out? It came back 3 weeks later, a month later, and the mites have continued to rise. So now they're at almost 14%. So I think this would have been a good time to move on to a different tack, use a different miticide. They decided to double down on oxalic acid. And so they did a 4 by 5. So they did 4 treatments 5 days apart. And by November, they had things pretty close to in control. Although I think they wasted a fair amount of time up here. They could have had things under control a lot quicker. They could have had things under control by the time we got here, I believe. But anyway, this is a good example of we had a 2% infestation. We applied a treatment, and at the end of the treatment, we were at 9%. So if they had not monitored, they would not have caught that. They would have said, hey, we applied a treatment, we handled our mites, we're good. But that is just not a good bet at all. Same thing with the oxalic acid vaporizations. I know there are a lot of folks that are doing them off-label. The label says you can use them when you have little to no cap brood. Certainly in September, there's a lot of cap brood, and I don't think it's a good. I would recommend against that, and the label I would say that you can't do that. But so be careful. All right, so that's most of what I learned in my monitoring program in 2019. I did some podcasts in December and January, so December of 19 and January of 20, and one of them was with my guest Jim Masucci. He had a great article in the December 2019 American Bee Journal entitled "Managing Varroa Mites: Lessons Learned from Large-Scale Honeybee Field Trials," where they did a lot of monitoring, and they saw a lot of the very same things that I saw in my 30 colonies, but they saw it, across a couple thousand colonies. So I think we're seeing similar things in both our things. So we spent about an hour talking about a lot of these issues, and I think it's if you're interested in monitoring, I think this is worth your time. My friend John Gott, he's a New Jersey beekeeper, and he had a great article in the Eastern Apicultural Society, newsletter, and you can find it here at this link. So tinyurl.com/SCUGMT5. You can read the whole article. But I really like John's attitude. A successful beekeeper is a successful mite manager. You have to understand that you're not just managing a colony of bees, you are also managing a colony of mites. And the sooner you understand that, I think the better. And in order to do that, you're going to need to get a good monitoring program. So execution of your Varroa management plan is adjusted based on your testing and any new information that you receive. So I tell folks, you cannot make good decisions if you don't have good information, and monitoring is how you get that information, right? So you got to get out there and do that work. I guess the other thing I want to say is monitoring is fairly easy. I have 30 colonies. I monitor them at least 6 times a year. And so if you only have a couple 10 colonies in your apiary, it should not be any problem. There's no excuse for you to not be out there doing this monitoring. And up to 30 colonies, I'll tell you, it's really easy. If you have 50 or 100 colonies, that could be more of a challenge. But I think you should invest in that work. And I will, in Randall Alston's article from Bailey Bee Supply, he links to the method that I use to monitor to do my samples. I collect my bees into Ziploc bags in the apiary, collect those samples into Ziploc bags when I'm doing just my regular inspection. And then I throw those bags in the freezer in my kitchen, and then I will process the samples in the kitchen when I have time. So that really minimizes my time in the apiary. I can collect these samples during a regular inspection, and that really helps me with my monitoring program. So think about ways where you can be more efficient and make the best use of your time in the apiary. All right, so that concludes my presentation. Definitely contact me if I can help. So probably the best way is cell phone 828-230-4544. You can text me there. You can call me. I'm driving a lot, so I don't answer the phone a lot, but I will return your call. So definitely leave me a message. And if you don't hear from me within a day or two, call me back. Sometimes I do drop the ball. And so if you don't hear back from me in a day or two, just call me back. I'm not ignoring you. I just sometimes I'm not as organized as I could be. So, but stay after me. And you can certainly send me an email, and I'll do my best. But there are a lot of good Varroa resources out there. If you have questions about monitoring, about treatment options, I'm happy to talk to you on the phone about that and do my best to help you. So with that, I think we'll end the webinar. Thanks for hanging with me. We'll talk to you soon.